This video is brought to you by Mubi, a curated streaming service showing exceptional films from around the globe. Try Mubi free for 30 days at mubi.com/CinemaTyler. While doing press for The Shining in 1980, Kubrick addressed the problem with using new creations in production design, costumes, music, and other aspects of filmmaking. He said, "Do you try to imagine something, or do you take a real hotel? It's like the way costumes used to be done in historical movies before Zeffirelli and Visconti. And if you made a costume picture, you'd get a costume designer. And from their vast store of culture, they would draw costumes for you. But Visconti and Zeffirelli suddenly made it artistically acceptable to copy paintings. Well, I think the same thing really is true in many instances with sets. If the real things are there." Five or so years earlier, Kubrick went all around Ireland, England, and West Germany, opting to shoot in many real historical locations for Barry Lyndon. If you've seen my video on the cinematography of Barry Lyndon, you'll know that this sometimes meant waiting for tour groups to pass by in between takes. Around 5 years earlier than that, Kubrick was doing pre-production on A Clockwork Orange, a sci-fi movie taking place in the not-too-distant future. But there was a problem. Kubrick's previous 2001: A Space Odyssey had gone way over budget and way behind schedule, and opened to mixed reviews. 2001 actually lost $800,000 on its initial run, and only turned a profit after a re-release in 1971, the same year that A Clockwork Orange hit theaters. Kubrick had to prove to studios that he could do a film on a relatively low budget. But how do you make a low-budget futuristic sci-fi movie on location without building a bunch of crazy sets? Well, that's what we're going to talk about on this episode of Making Film. A Clockwork Orange was shot on location in England during the winter of 1970 to 71. Kubrick's home in Abbotsmead served as production headquarters because it had, quote, editing rooms and a music facility which had a carefully cataloged record collection, with screening facilities in his living room and a garage that served as his office. Kubrick had told line producer Bernie Williams, "I want to make the movie within an hour and a half's travel time of my house, so figure out how far I can reach in that time in the rush hour." Williams was first asked to meet with Kubrick in 1968, shortly after 2001: A Space Odyssey had opened, and he decided to see the movie before meeting with Kubrick. Williams said, "I went to see the film the night before and came out with my head spinning, thinking, oh my god, I'm going to see the man who made this movie in the morning, and I don't understand the end. I went to his house in Borehamwood, and he was surrounded by cats and dogs. I was making notes of things he was telling me. He asked me why, and I said, I can't remember everything. He liked that because he always carries notebooks himself." Kubrick wanted the locations in the film to look a bit futuristic, so they started by looking in old British architectural magazines for interesting looking buildings to scout. Kubrick said, "I purchased 10 back issues of 3 different architectural magazines and spent 2 solid weeks with my art director John Barry, tearing out pages. Over those 2 weeks, Kubrick and Barry made a display file of potential locations, which, quote, allowed them to cross-reference the material in limitless ways." There's actually a book titled New British Architecture by Robert Maxwell that features several of the locations used in A Clockwork Orange, though it was published shortly after the film's release. Bernie Williams said, "We sent an army of production assistants to go out and shoot stills and do homework on locations. We bought 20 VW minivans and made them into mobile offices and prop trucks, so we could get around quicker. Looking back, that might not have been so smart, because we were working 16 hours a day and kept falling asleep on the job." So let's take a look at some of the locations they found.
Tell us all about it then.
The first is the theater where Alex and his droogs have a rumble with Billy Boy and his gang. Now, this isn't a futuristic location, but the story behind it is pretty interesting. The theater was an old casino on Tagg's Island. The Tagg family were successful in the boating industry, but around the turn of the century, the family ran out of money. Enter Fred Carno in 1912, who had made his fortune in theater promotion and financing. Carno bought the island and hotel and worked with an architect to demolish the old hotel and replace it with a luxury hotel, which he named the Carcino. Here is a very small photo of the Carcino when it was up and running in 1912. Carno employed several acts, including a young Charlie Chaplin who performed on this very stage. The way Kubrick begins with a pleasant-looking mural, only to widen to an attempted rape on a dilapidated stage, shows just how irreverent this movie will be. Also, notice the movements of the actors during the attempted rape, which Kubrick said, quote, has the overtones of a ballet. Next is Alex's parents' apartment.
Alex!
Author of The Complete Kubrick, David Hughes, said, Kubrick was imagining the future on a very small scale, so rather than build some kind of a futuristic apartment block, The idea was to use the worst possible apartment block that you could find in the 1960s in London, and at that stage there was a lot of them being thrown up.
Where I lived was with my dad and mum in municipal flat block 18A, Linear North.
They decided to use the newly built area of Thamesmead in London, characterized by its, quote, vast, dismal, windswept collection of tower blocks connected by intimidating walkways. McDowell said that it was, quote, a sort of social experiment, one of these places sort of belabored government built, and of course, within 10 years, it was a slum. This was also the same area that had the flat block marina called Binsey Walk, where Alex attacks his droogs. The complex was originally meant to, quote, house 60,000 people and incorporate homes, schools, factories, shops, and more.
Have a nice day at the factory.
It was meant to be built in 2 phases, with the first being completed around the time of production. However, only 40,000 people moved in, and because of an oil crisis and backlash against these kinds of projects, the second phase was never completed. The interiors were done in a real apartment about 15 or 17 stories up, in a high-rise very close to Kubrick's house in Bournemouth. There was a couple living in the apartment who were moved out during filming, and the production spent £5,000 decorating the apartment to look strange and futuristic. After shooting, Kubrick moved the couple out again to, quote, reshoot a couple of close-ups. The record store was actually the basement of the Chelsea drugstore on King's Road. The exterior was pretty cool looking, but they didn't use it in the movie. The drugstore was designed by Garnett, Clowley, and Blakemore, who also designed the restaurant at the top of the post office tower, or BT Tower. And the Chelsea drugstore was also name-checked in the Rolling Stones song, You Can't Always Get What You Want.
I went to the Chelsea drugstore.
It closed in the 70s and is now a McDonald's. A lot of people point out that you can see the soundtrack to Kubrick's 2001: A Space Odyssey in the record store scene, which, by the way, isn't the soundtrack, but rather a collection of movie theme music. But I remember reading, and I can't for the life of me find the source, that the record was actually found at the location. An artist and designer named John Coolhart made a great post cataloging every record and magazine he could find in the scene. You can find the link in the description. One thing he noticed is that the official soundtrack actually does make an appearance. Here. He also revealed that the record to the left has the Daisy Bell song that Hal sings in the film. As I mentioned in the previous video, these shots were done using a wide-angle Ingenue 9.8mm lens that had an f-stop of 0.95. This and several other lenses were cutting edge and perfect for location shooting because they let in so much more light than the standard f2.0 lenses and allowed Kubrick to shoot, quote, with natural light until late in the afternoon. Before we move on, I want to take a moment to mention this episode's bonus content. For this episode, I made a bonus video trivia game of 10 questions about Kubrick and A Clockwork Orange, and here's a preview. In A Clockwork Orange, the Droog's outfits are based on a sporting uniform that Malcolm McDowell had in his car. However, the jockstrap usually worn under the pants was instead worn on top of the pants as a giant codpiece. What sport does this uniform come from? It's just $1 and it really helps out the channel. You can find a link in the description and at the end of the video. Now back to the show. The futuristic-looking Ludovico Medical Clinic was filmed at Brunel University in West London. The building was built between 1965 and 1967, so not too long before the production. It looks like something you'd find on the Evil Building subreddit. That's because the building was done in a style called brutalism that is characterized as looking large and blocky and made of heavy-looking materials like concrete, giving the buildings a look that many describe as monolithic. What's really cool is that in 2011 they screened A Clockwork Orange in the same room that Alex received the Ludovico treatment. The university was also used for the police interrogation room, Alex's hospital room, and the lobby to his parents' apartment building, which were filmed in Tower D in the John Crank building. Perhaps the most important location in the film is Mr. Alexander's house. The exterior of the house was filmed at a place called New House in Shipton under Wychwood. It was designed and built in 1964 for a London barrister named Milton Grundy. The house is made up of 5 linked pavilions, but we mainly see the house's Japanese gavel garden. The interiors were filmed in a house called Skybreak House in Radlett, which was designed by Team 4 for an entrepreneur named Tony Jaffe. One source claims that Kubrick originally wanted to shoot the interiors of this house, but the owner, a man who brought 1-hour photo processing to the masses, denied Kubrick permission to shoot there. A Clockwork Orange was shot entirely on location except for 4 sets. These were, quote, the Kirova Milk Bar, the prison check-in, the writer's bathroom, and the entrance hall to his house. That said, none of these sets were built on a soundstage. Instead, the production rented a small factory warehouse near the old MGM studios, where they built all of the sets except for the entrance hall, which was built in a tent in the back garden of the Skybreak house they filmed the interiors in. Another source says that it was the bathroom that was made in the tent. The Kirova Milk Bar is perhaps the most iconic location in the film. It's the place where the Droogs and other strange inhabitants of the Clockwork Orange universe drown their sorrows or gain an edge for ultra-violence by drinking a Moloko Plus, a fictional cocktail consisting of milk mixed with either Velocet, an amphetamine like Adderall, Synthamesk, a synthetic mescaline, or Drinkrum, short for adrenochrome. Whoa, wait a second. Isn't adrenochrome that insane adrenaline drug from Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas?
What is this shit?
That stuff makes pure mescaline seem like ginger beer, man.
Yeesh. No wonder Alex is so insane. The most striking aspect of the Kirova Milk Bar is the nude female mannequins that dispense the Moloko Plus and stand in for much of the furniture. Kubrick said, "I had seen an exhibition of sculpture which displayed female figures as furniture. From this came the idea for the fiberglass nude figures which were used as tables in the milk bar. To get the poses right for the sculptress who modeled the figures, John Barry photographed a nude model in as many positions as he could imagine would make a table. There are fewer positions than you might think." The sculptures Kubrick saw at the exhibition were the work of British pop artist Alan Jones in 1970, so very close to the time of A Clockwork Orange's production. Jones hadn't worked in sculpture before, so he oversaw a sculptor who made the figures out of fiberglass based on Jones's drawings. The piece was titled Hat Stand, Table, and Chair, depicting women in corsets, gloves, and leather boots positioned to behave as furniture. Looking back on the sculptures, Jones said, "I was living in Chelsea and I had an interest in the female figure and the sexual charge that comes from it. Every Saturday on the King's Road, you went out and skirts were shorter. The body was being displayed in some new way. And you knew that the following week, somebody would up the ante. I was reflecting on and commenting on exactly the same situation that was the source of the feminist movement. It was unfortunate for me that I produced the perfect image for them to show how women were being objectified." Yeah, there was a lot of controversy surrounding the sculptures during this exhibition. Kubrick contacted Jones to do something similar for A Clockwork Orange, but Jones turned him down because Kubrick didn't offer any payment. But Jones agreed to give Kubrick permission to make something based on his work. The figures were made for the film by sculptor Liz Moore, who also made the Star Child for 2001: A Space Odyssey. A Clockwork Orange takes place in a future where sexual imagery is everywhere. On the subject, Kubrick said, "The erotic decor in the film suggests a slightly futuristic period for the story, the assumption being that erotic art will eventually become popular art. And just as you now buy African wildlife paintings in Woolworths, you may one day buy erotica." In Alex's room, you can see dancing ceramic Christ sculptures called Christ Unlimited, which were made by two Dutch sculptors, Herman and Cornelius McKink, who also made this strange thing called Rocking Machine.
Leave that alone, don't touch it! It's a very important work of art!
For several of the locations, but most notably at the Health Farm, Kubrick gathered many erotic paintings from various artists, but in Mr. Alexander's house, you can see a giant painting titled Seed Boxes by Kubrick's wife Christiane, and you can see several of her paintings in Eyes Wide Shut. This one was actually painted by Kubrick's daughter Katerina. This is her on the set of Barry Lyndon next to her younger sister Vivian. The painting is of his cat Polly and was a gift for his 60th birthday. As you usually do when filming on location, the shooting schedule was built around specific locations. Because the structure of A Clockwork Orange is sort of a U-shape, where plot points happen before the Ludovico treatment and we return to the same plot points after the Ludovico treatment, they simply shot everything at each location all at once. This meant that Malcolm McDowell was constantly going back and forth between playing pre-treatment Alex and post-treatment Alex. Just to let you know a little of what the schedule was like, the very first scene they shot was Alex having breakfast with Dr. Branham. It's kind of a strange scene to start with because Malcolm McDowell had to portray Alex after several major things have impacted the character and without first exploring Alex's normal baseline life.
I mean, the first day was terrifying, absolutely nightmarish. We shot a scene in the hospital, the Ludovico hospital, where I'm having breakfast, and I hadn't really got a clue, what I was doing, really. I was basically saying the lines and just hoping that it was right. And when we saw the rushes the next evening, Stanley said, that's right, we've got it, that's it. And on the way home, I remember that I thought to myself, well, Now, what was it? I can't remember quite what I did do, you know.
The scenes that took place at the Kirova Milk Bar were shot halfway through production. The iconic opening shot of the film happened after many of the other scenes were already in the can. If you've seen my series on 2001: A Space Odyssey, you'll know that during the production of 2001, Kubrick had the luxury of deciding which set to film on each day because they were more or less all ready for him at the same time. It was back to basics for Kubrick. His earliest movies were low budget, but Kubrick was such a big name at this point that it had been a while since Kubrick wasn't given the moon and the stars, so to speak. Kubrick decided to simplify the crew first, opting for a skeleton crew that was able to get around in a pinch. Shooting on location also means that you can't remove a wall to get a better angle or to fit dolly tracks. Some of the tracking shots in tight areas like the record store and the prison were done using a regular old wheelchair, which brings to mind the guerrilla filmmaking techniques employed by the greats of the French New Wave. It's worth noting that this practice would be replaced by the use of a Steadicam on his later films. One thing that Kubrick was really proud of was that he didn't use any post-synchronous sound on A Clockwork Orange. This means that every line of dialogue you hear, outside of the narration, was recorded on location. This can be very difficult because if you shoot in a location with a lot of noise and wind, it tends to ruin the recording of dialogue, and you have to re-record the lines in a studio space and lay them over the film. Forever a gearhead, Kubrick was not afraid to mix the old technology with the new. He said, "I'm quite pleased about this because every scene was shot on location. Even the so-called sets that we built, which were, in fact, built in a factory about 40 feet off the noisy high street in Bournemouth, a few hundred yards from the old MGM studio. Despite this, we were able to get quite acceptably clean soundtracks. With the modern equipment that's available today in the form of microphones, radio transmitters, and so forth, it should be possible to get a usable soundtrack almost anywhere. In the scene where the tramp recognizes Alex, who's standing near the Thames, next to the Albert Bridge, there was so much traffic noise on the location that you had to shout in order to be heard. But we were able to get such a quiet soundtrack that it was necessary to add street noise in the final mix to make it realistic. We used a microphone the size of a paperclip, and it was secured with black tape on the tramp's scarf. In several shots, you can see the microphone, but you don't know what you're looking at. And you can just barely see the microphone right here." Kubrick was also an early user of a quote, "new Dolby system in post-production to reduce or eliminate unwanted sounds."
Well, that's good.
Are you like me and often find yourself endlessly scrolling through a streaming service's catalog looking for something to watch? It's difficult when the bad and the good are all mixed together. Well, Mubi has solved this problem by hosting hand-selected films by cinephiles like you, not an algorithm. Mubi hosts a variety of great movies ranging from award-winning masterpieces and festival-fresh gems to cult classics and those hard-to-find movies that you always keep an eye out for. What I love about Mubi is how they curate their releases into retrospectives, specials, and specific subgenres. Right now, they have a special retrospective series on the masterpieces of Weimar Germany, like Spies by Fritz Lang. Watch the thrilling spy adventure that influenced the likes of Tintin and James Bond, and then join in the discussion in Mubi's community of film lovers. Try Mubi free for 30 days at mubi.com/CinemaTyler. That's mubi.com/CinemaTyler for a whole month of great cinema for free. Or join me on Patreon at the $5 level and get extended access to Mubi as a perk. Thanks for watching.